This is Talking Hardcore, the podcast for people who love hardcore history.
You study history because it allows us to understand the present and prepare for the future.
Yeah, it's like Shakespeare or a Greek tragedy.
Could you imagine what was in the Library of Alexandria?
I bet it was porn.
I'm not even wearing pants right now, Scott.
What's the old Clint Eastwood line? A man's got to know his limitations. I know my limitations.
The Talking Hardcore podcast is presented by Ace Industrial Solutions. Are you in need of skilled trade professionals for your next project? Look no further.
Welcome to Talking Hardcore.
You're
with
listening
George
to Talking Hardcore with George.
and Scott
And today we're joined by author
and frequent contributor.
Matt Bellah. Everybody.
Hey guys, how's it going?
All right, we're using this one. I like it.
That's awesome.
All right, that was like the third take, guys. We had some technical difficulties. I hope you liked our intro.
George is a technical difficulty.
Your mom's a technical difficulty.
Wow.
All right, so today we're here to talk about the new Common Sense episode that dropped. Dan Carlin put out the first Common Sense episode in a few years, and the first in really, besides one-offs, he hasn't done a Common Sense episode in a long time. And the episode, if you don't know, Common Sense is a politics podcast that Dan Carlin does. I know if you're joining us, you listen to us regularly, you know, most likely you know about hardcore history, the history podcast he does, but he also does a politics podcast. And the episode he put out this week was basically an indictment of everything Trump and the office of the president in general. And I think he raised some good points. I think he also is wrong about several important factors. And I thought I asked Scott and Matt if they would like to record an episode to talk about it, because I know that they have a different perspective. Each of us have a different perspective here, and I thought it would be a good conversation. So who wants to start?
Well, we start with what Matt's pointing towards us.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to go with, all right, at the beginning of the podcast, if you haven't listened to it, I'll put a link in the description. But at the beginning of the Common Sense episode, Dan Carlin says that Donald Trump is a narcissist who completely lacks any empathy. And I can understand how you would get that opinion of him based on tweets and media coverage. But I also think he's wrong. I've listened to podcasts with people who know him, like his kids and other people who know him personally. And I don't think that I get that impression at all.
Well, do you think anybody would come out and be like, his kids or family would be like...
No. When you listen to them tell stories, he does not come across as somebody who lacks empathy. I believe he's a narcissist.
Well, I'll go.
But I don't think there's been a single person who's been president in the last 200 years that hasn't been a narcissist.
Oh, I'll go with you on that one.
You know,
100%.
at least the last 100 years.
Sure.
That hasn't been pretty heavily narcissistic. Okay. Sure. Not even, and Dan says that. Well, Dan says that in the podcast.
And that's what kind of people are gravitated to running for the presidency.
If you think that you're good enough to be president of the United States, you're going to have a big ego.
Yeah, and think very highly of yourself.
Of course you are. But what I think that when he says Trump has no empathy, I don't think that that's accurate. I don't think you would be able to be a good father and lack empathy. And I think by all accounts, there is zero evidence that he's not a good father. Okay. And that doesn't mean that he's a good man or any of that, but I don't think that you can actually point to any actual evidence that he has no empathy. Now, does he say rude, mean things on Twitter? Or did he used to? Yes. He's a troll.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, being a troll on the internet does not mean you don't have any empathy. It just means you like to troll people.
Or you tell harsh truths.
Well, sometimes, but like also he is just a troll.
Sure.
Okay. But I don't think that always translates into real life. There is this whole thing nowadays where what your online persona is might be completely different than what your real life persona is. And there are a lot of people who act that out. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but it is a real thing. So by him, also part of the trolling he does it's a pushback against political correctness, which is what we used to call it. Now it's woke. But like, it's a natural, inevitable pushback against woke political correctness. When people are afraid to say anything, somebody will say the stuff that everybody's not allowed to say, and it will gain them notoriety.
Well,
and that's exactly how he ended up becoming president.
Or they'll say what everybody's thinking.
Not even everybody.
Or
they'll say stuff that makes some people laugh and be like, I can't believe he said that shit. Because Trump is funny, one. But like the comments about Rosie O'Donnell and stuff like that, right? Completely immature dickhead shit.
Sure.
But guys are completely immature dickheads.
Yep.
What he's doing is showing it to everybody.
But he also actually knows Rosie O'Donnell.
Which means he might actually know that she is as bad as he says. Who knows? But my point is, that is a new type of personality that's probably always been around, but now it gets to get aired in public because online trolling is an actual thing. And he used online trolling to become president.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean he doesn't have empathy. I don't think you could get to where he is in life without empathy, because you need to understand, well, maybe it'd be harder. All right. You need to understand how people think and how people work. And so you could argue that he's a sociopath, which means he wouldn't have any empathy. But I don't think that there's actually good evidence for that. I think it's just he's rude, especially online. And in person, he can be rude. In the debates, he's rude. But I think he correctly identified that that's what it would take to break through the duopoly of political parties. The Democrat and Republican Party had this duopoly where the media basically controlled the elections, and you were going to get basically the same things were going to happen no matter who won.
Sure.
Okay. When Obama won, did anything different happen than if McCain had won? Probably not. When he beat Romney, what actually changed that wouldn't have? Probably very little, because the uniparty. Right.
No, but I don't think Romney would have been pushing for the Affordable Care Act.
Right. But I mean, in general, most of the policies, the wars, all that shit would have continued. The budget go up every year. That would have continued.
Sure.
So for Trump to break through without being a Republican Party insider and a deep state guy, he had to do something different. And so what he did is he took that brash BS persona that he used in his reality TV show and took it online on Twitter, and then used that to gain a public audience, a large audience, and then used that to get media coverage, and was able to spin that into being president.
Yep. I think it even shocked him the first time that he won.
Maybe not by the end, but if you'd have told him at the beginning you're going to win, he probably wouldn't have believed you.
Yeah.
But maybe his ego is so big that he would have.
Well, you never know.
I always made the joke that I think he ended up running because him and Bill were golfing, and Bill was saying how Hillary was going to be president, and Donald was like, shit, I could be president before her. And Bill made him a bet. And so they bet $100, or it's like trading spaces. They bet $1, right? They bet $1, and then Trump ended up being president. That is my funny thought process on that, but it's probably not real.
Anyway, back to the episode.
I don't think there's any proof that that he lacks empathy.
No, but like you said, a narcissist, sure.
But that is the classic liberal approach to Republican Party, that they don't have any empathy. But that's because, again, we don't need to argue about all this. I think that's I think that's a no. I mean, I don't know if this is something we should be debating.
No, I agree. Episode. It's a misnomer.
But the reason that they argue that is because, hey, we think that the empathetic policies that they have don't work. It's not that we don't think people need help. It's that we think the way they want to be helping them don't work. That's what conservatives think. But just thinking that doesn't mean you don't have empathy.
The problem with helping people is you have to help them until they can help themselves. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say.
Right.
I'm done.
Okay.
That's it.
Matt, you want to jump in on any of this, or should we move on to my next
Dan
point?
said some things that I agree with and some things that I don't agree with. Kind of my takeaway was that he states a pretty obvious point, which is over the years, and he goes all the way back to practically the beginning. He quotes Lincoln, all this kind of stuff, concerns that Lincoln had when the presidency, the power of the presidency was beginning to be expanded in its early days. And it was a very core, simplified structure. And Washington was very concerned about not appearing to overreach his power. And Lincoln was concerned when people said, you can just invade any country you want based on self-defense. And so we've gone from that all the way to nowadays where the office of the presidency practically resembles a monarch. I believe that's absolutely accurate. Dan was kind of talking about that it's just become bloated. And so the powers of the presidency are able to be used in ways that could justify something that is basically a clone of a dictator, okay? And that his second point, based around the individual itself in question who is in the office today, is exactly the kind of person who would do that, okay?
And I think
difficult.
Okay, go ahead.
It's difficult to make an argument against that when Trump is tweeting things like he saves the state, breaks no law. Let me keep going. Yeah, and continually like why can't I just do this? All this kind of stuff. But I do think I'm gonna come out in public here. I think Dan is hung up on Trump's personality a little too much. Okay, I don't think Trump is going to press the red button. I don't think he's going to launch a nuclear warhead missile. I don't think he's going to get us in a situation where one needs to be launched. I don't see that, okay? And as far as the other things, I think it matters why Trump is doing all this stuff with the immense powers of the president, with the salvo of executive orders. And I think his intention absolutely matters. Yeah, he's pushing things. We're seeing the boundaries of the presidency's power, but like almost every one of these things, like I just posted in our Discord last night a list of from the Federal Register, a list of all the executive orders that Trump has put out so far. Okay, and you go along, and it doesn't look bad on paper. Okay, I got to tell you that. Like most of that stuff is streamlining federal government. There's a lot of stuff in there people aren't even talking about. They're focusing on like 5 things that they can say, oh, this is bad, and even the things that I agree with, they're saying are bad. You know what I mean? So there's just such a way to slant this stuff. I think I agree wholeheartedly with Dan that the presidency is way too powerful. There's ways to abuse it. And his other point was that like this establishes a precedent that the next guy could come along and maybe he wants to just take all the power. You know what I mean? So that is a concern. It's a legitimate concern, but I don't see why it should be so focused about the person in the office right now. I think a lot of that has to do with people not liking his personality, which is understandable. And Dan even says that where he says he's just not the type of person I want to be president. I get that. That's fine. But let's see what he's actually doing. And I'm willing to give this stuff a fair shake neutrally. I mean, it's been really hard for me. I've had a journey on my way from being, over here to in the middle more. You know what I mean? And it's I really enjoy seeing things clearly. I will call things out when I think they deserve to be called out.
Sure.
But those are the 2 points I had. I agree with them about the bloated power of the presidency, and I think he's a little too focused on Trump personally.
Well, and if you to get to that first point, even Dan says in the episode, for the last 3 decades it's been going on this way where
3 centuries.
No,
go ahead.
He said decades.
Okay, go ahead.
Anyway, I think he said like 30 or 40 years. Anyway, where like, look, he even mentioned Obama. Like Obama's like, well, if Congress isn't going to act, then I'm going to, and sign an executive order. And that's that. It's almost like lawfare. Okay, and I brought this correlation up because once you start breaking into the executive orders and you start signing a bunch of executive orders to correct the course the country's on or change the course the country's on. Because Congress, and I actually put this in a post so I was discussing this with somebody on Facebook. No administration in our lifetimes has come in and done exactly what they said they were going to do.
Yes.
Reduce the size of the government.
Yes.
And actually, if you look at Trump's policies and what he's doing, he's actually limiting or reducing the size of the executive branch in an effort to force Congress to do their job. And unfortunately, Congress is not doing their job, and they can't get anything.
So let's stop.
Okay,
for
sorry.
a second. I think you raised a great point.
All right, sorry.
Because I want to break that down.
All
Because that's something that Dan just does not talk about. Is if DOGE and what Trump is trying to do is actually to limit the power of the executive branch by shrinking it, that is not a violation of the separation of powers.
No,
it is not a violation of the checks and balances. It is getting closer to restoring those checks and balances. If he is actively trying to reduce the size and scope of the executive branch, then what he's trying to do is fix the problem that Dan identified. And he said he's been talking about for the whole time he's been doing Common Sense. And I think that's important. But Dan, and he jokes about this, having TDS.
Yeah.
But he really does. He really does, because he can't see through the forest through the trees. Because he's so worried, and he talks about how his main thing is freedom.
Yeah.
Okay, and so is mine. Like that is my thing.
Yep.
Okay, like that is close to my core philosophy. I'm not a religious person. I believe in individual liberty. Yeah. That is my core philosophy. Okay, which is why I think Dan always resonated so much with me, or at least it helps. That is a thing that I think about and I worry about. And so when he blows off the last 4 years as Biden was just more of the same thing he was always bitching about, I think that could not be more wrong. And I think that is really ruins the credibility of his argument. The lawfare against Trump, his political opponent, Biden trying to jail his political opponent.
Well, not even just Biden. Look at the
shit
spying
Hillary
on Trump Tower during his first administration,
right?
During the first presidential run.
What Trump has shown by being in the system and breaking the system is how fucking broke it already was.
Yeah.
Okay. And so for him to say that Biden was just more of the same, I think is wrong. We don't even know who was making the decisions for the whole executive branch. And Dan alluded to that, but that's a big fucking deal.
Yeah.
We don't even know who was president.
Well,
we fucking had an election.
Hold on.
And then we have no idea who was president.
Dan alluded to it and then glossed over it.
That's what I'm saying.
And this isn't an attack on Dan Carlin. But I'm just saying, like, he
destroys the credibility of his argument against Trump if he fails to see how dangerous the last administration was for individual liberty. Look at COVID. And Dan always says, I give people the benefit of the doubt in times like that. No, in times of emergencies, that's when dictators seize power.
Sure.
Yeah. And the Biden administration did a lot of that. And you know who didn't do a lot of that? Trump. So if you want to talk about Trump's wanting to be a dictator, then why the hell didn't he use those emergency powers that Dan talks about in the episode? Why didn't he use them during COVID? He could have locked the whole country down, declared a state of martial law, and just took over.
Yeah.
And you know what?
If that were going to happen, that would have been the perfect
right.
Perfect
what Dan will say is, well, the people around him were able to keep him from doing that, because that's what the liberals say to that. And I don't think that there's actually good evidence that that's true, because Trump talks about all the time about federalism and how he thinks the states have power. Now, talking about dictators that personally you like, that's good for international relations. So you can't just give him shit for like, oh yeah, Putin's my friend. He has to be able to have a working relationship with Putin and Xi Jinping and even the fucking guy in North Korea, Kim Jong-un.
Yeah.
Like, that's part of being president. So if you only get up there and virtue signal, then you can't have working relationships with those people.
Sure.
So to say that means he wants to be a dictator is just not proven out by actual facts. Well, it's not, and that's the problem.
And like I said, George, that's why I'm very happy that, maybe he didn't put the best guy in charge of DOGE, but I'm just.
I think he probably put the only guy who would have done it.
Well, and what's funny about that is, Dan brings up Elon Musk a little bit during the during the episode. And, he's like, well, all right, first thing, what about the salute that, or what about the hand gesture, the signaling, the gesture that Elon Musk did, after they won the presidency or Trump won the presidency.
Right.
You know what? Yeah, it was odd. I didn't understand why it happened.
If you listen to the whole context, he's saying, "My heart goes out to you."
Yeah,
and the guy was jacked because he put his whole life on the line.
Did you listen to Musk on Rogan immediately after that talking about that exact thing? And
I didn't.
I know people who refuse to listen to Joe Rogan because they think it's all propaganda. And I'm just like, dude, I go as close as possible to a primary source and I form my own opinion. Okay. Like, don't tell me not to listen to the people about whom you are talking and want me to form an opinion. That is ridiculous. It's 3 steps removed. It's someone else's opinion. And I really don't like to hear that kind of what do you think that Elon Musk just came out on national TV and intentionally performed the Nazi salute because this is literally a fascist takeover of democratic government?
Right.
That is utterly ridiculous, but that is the narrative going around in the world. And I hate to hear it repeated
now,
in any way by people I greatly respect.
The one thing Dan said is, okay, I can give Elon, he's a weird guy, I can cut him, give him a benefit of the doubt. But then Steve Bannon does it. Well, you know why Steve Bannon does it? Because he's a fucking troll.
Yeah.
And so you don't give the trolls leeway. You just ignore that shit, and then it doesn't catch fire. What you're doing when you talk about the shit the trolls are doing is you're providing oxygen to the flames.
Yeah.
Steve Bannon did the same thing when he talked about we haven't ruled out that Trump could run for a third term.
That's bullshit. They know that.
Trolling. It is just trolling.
Well, wait,
and I got to tell you, if he tries to do that shit, I'll be one of the first people out there stopping that and going along, because that's not right.
Well, and I thought the same thing when Dan's like, well, where's the line that you draw? And you know what? If even though Bannon kind of trolled on that and said that, but people believe it. That's the odd part.
But he doesn't speak for Trump.
No, I understand. I'm just saying.
Right.
I think that's odd. But whatever. It's just trolling. But if that were to happen, if they said, "Oh, Trump's going to go for a third term," there's no way. We put term limits in there on purpose after FDR.
It's a constitutional amendment. To get that passed, for that to work, they would have to amend the Constitution. And that will never happen.
No.
And Trump is not going to seize power.
Yeah,
and that's the problem. Well, he has never defied a Supreme Court order. He has not done anything that would actually make you think that is. You can't look at any actual actions he's done and said, look, he seized power. Now, you want to talk about January 6th? We can get into that. That was a dumb move. He got outplayed. I really think that he got outplayed that day. I think he made stupid moves, and the politicians who were more savvy took advantage.
Yeah,
and I believe that is on him, and that was one of the worst things that he could have done by bringing those people there and trying to stop Pence from certifying the election. But I also completely understand the motivation, because there was a lot of weird shit going on.
I was about to ask you, George, on that point. What do you think it means that he was elected after that? Do you think it means his followers believe that his reasons for opposing the election were correct, or do you believe that they understand that, as you say, he was outplayed and there was a bunch of snookery going on?
I think it's two things.
Okay.
Partly, and then I also think it's that the average person who voted for Trump doesn't give a shit. The Democrats overplayed the January 6th card because they hammered on it, and they called it the worst day in American history, worse than 9/11, worse than Pearl Harbor, and they overplayed their hand. And so it became a thing that people just ignored.
Let's be clear, empires fall from within. So, being attacked from without made us stronger, but eroding the institutions of our democracy. Were that to be the case, I'm just saying,
right, but it wasn't an insurrection. Right. Those guys didn't even have guns. They were walking around through the velveted ropes.
Escorted.
The vast majority of them. And the only people who died that day was one lady who was a protester. So if you want to say that it was a riot, I agree. If you want to say that there was some people who broke into the Capitol, I believe that's probably accurate. But we do not know who those people were, because those were the weirdos that were actually dressed all up in black and SWAT shit. The people who were arrested and charged, Those people were just walking around with fucking flags looking like complete retards and morons. Like, oh, this will be a good photo op. No, dumbass, don't go in.
Well, and
that was stupid.
And they were being escorted. That's the other weird part.
When you watch the videos, the cops were walking them around. Okay, so that whole narrative falls apart, but that only falls apart to people who actually follow it. I think the most of the middle who voted for Trump, not the people like us who follow this stuff, I think they just didn't give a shit. I think it was like, well, that was obviously overblown.
They don't associate it with him personally, is what you're saying.
Well, you think about it. Yeah, that's probably a good way to say it.
Okay.
But, I mean, we just came off of that. January 6th just came off of the summer of 2020, where real riots burned down buildings, federal buildings, people's businesses, and people died. Okay. That happened. And then they were calling what happened at the Capitol as an insurrection. And I don't think that rang true to most Americans. So people who were pretty left, that rang true to them.
Yeah.
But most people that were in the middle, that wore off. The shock of that wore off, and it became, oh, that's just a classic Democrat overreaction.
Okay.
And I think that's why it didn't matter.
It's interesting.
And I think it's true. I think that it really, like I said, Trump got outplayed.
You will look from the left to the right and see the people who voted for Trump this time and say you are supporting a person who tried to overthrow the United States government. Like that's a narrative, that's a way of examining it. So it's interesting to hear that perspective, and it breaks it down and ameliorates it.
But remember, they did worse than that. They called him Hitler.
Right,
and he still won.
Yeah, and that leads me into you're right, and that shows that people who voted for him are more intelligent than. So that leads me into my next point, which is when you look at, let's fast forward again to Trump's second term and the thing we're actually talking about today. So when we look at these things like the executive orders, all these actions that he's taking, historically, they're really, unless we break it down like we're doing, and it's just the outside in view where you're saying he's just going crazy. He's reaching for all the power. When you look at it historically, there's very few examples of this that are not someone becoming a dictator. And of course, Dan is looking at this historically, and he's looking into the future too, because that's what history teaches us. So he's saying the next guy down the line, this sets a precedent. It's the new line in the sand. It steps it forward one more time. The next guy might use it all. I get that. But looking at it historically, you know what I mean? But looking at it practically and like what is actually happening, I am honestly confused. When people say fascism, I am astounded. When people say he's abusing his power, I don't understand what you're talking about. And that's not because I'm not paying attention. It's because I am paying attention. I am confounded by what is going on in the world nowadays.
Right.
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills, and it's difficult to talk to anyone about this rationally.
And that's the hard part. And so I'll give you an example so you don't feel alone. Like my wife, who never really followed politics, partly this is my fault. The last couple of years I've been ranting and raving more and exposing her to more of the political arguments. And now she sees it, and now she's got it into her Instagram algorithm and stuff. And she's like, but how can anybody believe that? And I'm like, well, it's very difficult to get. And so I try to explain to her like the steps you have to walk to get down that path to think that. But you've been following it all along. So and you still have a hard time. Imagine somebody who just jumps in now. Yeah. And they're like, well, how can one side think that and the other side think that? It's like, because there's two different realities.
Yeah.
Right. And we live in and that's one of the things Common Sense talks about in the intro, right? The partisanship.
Yeah.
Sure.
Extreme partisanship.
I agree.
Right.
But if you want to talk about that and you don't mention Joe Biden at all, then you lose the credibility.
So Dan covers this in the episode. He says, like, why didn't you talk about this when Joe Biden was goose-stepping his way through the White House? And he said because Joe Biden represented the status quo.
But he didn't. No, it was so much worse. That's why I'm saying I disagree with Dan. He gave a speech about the unvaccinated. We're gonna cause a summer of death. Joe Biden was so divisive. Yeah. They kept trying to put Trump in jail. His political opponent. Obama didn't do that. What was the last people that tried to put their political opponent in jail? What was it, Nixon?
I don't know.
Right? Like, I mean, come on. That is not the status quo. COVID mandates was not the status quo. That took government executive power and blew it out of water. How about all the fucking preemptive pardons?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that was
nuts.
messed up, too.
Fauci, Hunter Biden.
Hold on.
Like, come on.
Oh, yeah, from February of 2014 all the way to...
Right.
What?
Right. When Hunter Biden all of a sudden starts working for an energy company in Ukraine...
Yeah.
That is now at war, maybe partly because of Joe Biden's meddling in Ukraine.
That's Biden and Obama.
But Joe Biden had a big, because that war could have been avoided. Right. I know you've talked about it a lot, and you have been more right on this issue than I ever have. But
thank you, George.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that.
But Fauci, it goes back to 2014.
Yeah.
Well, why is that?
Because they started...
because the fucking gain of function research. Now, we all have to...
In Ukraine.
Sorry, my daughter's sleeping above us upstairs. I have to stop yelling. My wife texted me that said, Lainey said I'm being too loud, and she just texted again.
In Ukraine and China. Yeah, there you go.
No.
Gain of
function research. And Anthony Fauci pushing gain of function research in a lab in China that was known to have faulty safety standards. Okay. Now, we all have to deal with COVID for the rest of our fucking lives. And Joe Biden fucking pardoned him.
Yeah.
Without anybody even letting the truth come out. Without even having a trial first. There should be a trial first if you're going to pardon somebody. So that we all know what you're pardoning him for.
Yeah, but
you know why? You know why? Because Donald Trump is Hitler, and he would have gone after his political enemies. That's what that narrative. That's what that narrative shows. That's what that narrative shows. Not that this guy was actually guilty, and that we are protecting ourselves because we were associated with that. It's because that guy over there is so nasty. Look at him. Look at that guy. Don't look at what's going on over here. Look at that guy. He's bad. He's bad guy.
So who threw out the political norms then?
Well,
who threw out the political norms? If they use Trump as an excuse to spy on him, to spy on his campaign,
that is the hugest deal.
Hillary Clinton, they bugged his campaign. They did the Steele dossier, to try to discredit him, which caused all the problems with the relationship with Russia, again, helping to lead to the Ukraine war. Okay. All of these negative things that have happened in the world because the Democrats threw out political norms to try to deal with Trump. And why did they do that? Because he wasn't a regular Republican. Because he was an outsider who said mean things on Twitter.
I also think, and this is going to be speculative here, I think that after 20 years of war in Afghanistan and Iraq, the military-industrial complex, I think the politicians in the military-industrial complex really needed to find a way to sell weapons without killing Americans or without us losing a bunch of money or time, personnel and resources. So I honestly think that's
one way you could look at it.
I don't.
Okay, and I'm not saying you're wrong.
And piss off the Russians.
But I'm not saying
you know how
wrong.
valuable it is to be able to test new weapon systems in actual combat?
That's what I was going to say. That's the way they tell that to themselves.
Sure.
Is we're keeping Americans safe while weakening Russia and getting to use up our old ordnance and test new things and see where the war goes. Terrible. To risk lives and waste.
And you want to talk about empathy?
You
want to talk how passionately does Trump talk about the lives that are being lost in Ukraine?
You know what?
You ever hear Biden like, oh, it's a bad thing?
Did we talk
Trump
about
rants about it, dude? He goes off.
He ran on it.
Did we talk about? I watched the entire press conference with Zelensky, Trump, and Vance. And Marco
we
Rubio.
have not talked about that.
Oh, okay. So I have to bring this up.
Sure.
And this expands on your point about Trump having to be cordial with, foreign leaders, right?
Yeah.
Like Putin or Xi Jinping.
Has to be.
But anyway, maybe not Kim Jong-un. But anyway, so the point is here, they came to a deal. They had the press conference, and then literally Zelensky torpedoed that deal right on pretty much a global network or global press conference, starting off with rhetoric where Putin's a monster, he's killing people.
And I
Here's
understand why he says that.
I understand it too.
I understand.
But it wasn't, it
wasn't the right time and place.
It really wasn't the time and place.
Because as the leader, you have to lead. And
Sure.
sometimes you have to be willing to do hard things and to take compromises that you don't like to save your people.
Sure. And it just seemed like Zelensky came out and torpedoed whatever they had discussed or whatever they had agreed upon. He literally torpedoed it right there.
Right.
And even Trump's like, do you see what I'm dealing with? Well, yeah.
Right.
I mean, I understand he's upset, but at the same time, I mean, this would help end the war and help Ukrainian security with having Americans in Ukraine to extract rare earth minerals.
Yeah, it does. But anyway, I think you're.
That's why
I think yeah, no, you're right. I think the point that I make here, and the reason I think Dan Carlin is wrong, and I'm just going to say that I think he's wrong about Trump. He's not wrong about the office of the president. I've been saying that for years as well.
Up, yeah.
Checks and balances.
Sure.
Yes.
Big chunk of this went out the window with FDR, and Dan talks about that, and I've railed on that for years. And it's only after listening to more of Dan Carlin's episodes that I've given more sympathy for FDR.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing that occurred to me during one of Dan's talks is maybe FDR was the lesser of two evils. Sure, he threw the Constitution out, but if we didn't, we might have had a communist revolution.
Sure.
And I never thought about that until I listened to some Dan Carlin's, the episode about the Great Depression.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that's a great point. A little socialism to avoid communism. And that's true. But that was the biggest thing that led to a lot of where we have been since then. But that's why I think Dan is missing the point, because he's making this point like, okay, what's good for the goose? But let's look at what the previous goose did.
Yeah.
Okay, and I got 2 more points. I've already raised a bunch of problems I had with Joe Biden, but they wanted to get rid of the filibuster.
Yeah.
And the only reason they couldn't get rid of the filibuster because of Munchin and what's the other lady's name? Semica? Something like that. The Arizona lady, senator. Those were the 2 people stopping the Democrats from getting rid of the filibuster. Do you know why they wanted to get rid of the filibuster? So they could pack the Supreme Court. And they said that. If you want to pack the Supreme Court, are you really worried about checks and balances?
No.
Well, you're not. And what did the judges that Trump put on the Supreme Court do? What do they say they believe? And this is all the federal judges that Trump has put in. They're constitutionalists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is fucking amazing and huge because they don't always go with Trump.
No.
A bunch of times they have ruled against him.
Yeah.
And I'm great with that. Even if I think they're wrong, I'm great with that.
Yeah, but
because that is a check on the power of the president. And the reason we're in this problem is because the legislature stopped being a check on the power of the president.
Yeah.
They have not done it in a long time. And that's because the people who are in power in Congress, whose president is in power, do not consider the president as an enemy. They're not supposed to be enemies. I'm sorry. But under the Constitution, they're supposed to be the check on his power.
Yep.
Instead, it's the Republicans and the president versus the Democrats. And when it was Biden, it was the Democrats and Biden versus the Republicans. And that's not how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be Congress versus is checking the power of the president. But they don't do that because why? Because of political parties. And what did the founders think would ruin the system if we had political parties?
Well, it was inevitable.
It may have been. Parties. It may have been. But there's ways to limit the power, and we have and that's the biggest thing, okay, is we have left any checks on political parties are gone because of campaign finance laws, and we don't have any rules on that, and we don't have good enough rules on lobbying or any of that stuff. And parties have become so powerful that there is nothing you can do except if you're Trump.
And they're not going to get rid of political party, or they're not going to get rid of lobbyists or anything until you get the money out of politics. And they're never going to get the money out of politics because that's what feeds them.
Well, you can do it, but it's hard.
You can't.
It's hard. Do you know how you do it? You need a guy like Trump, and you need a movement to do that. And it takes constitutional amendments. That's what it takes. Campaign finance reform would have to be a constitutional amendment because the Supreme Court said that donating to campaigns is political speech, so you cannot limit it.
Yeah.
Well, you can fix that with a constitutional amendment that says we're gonna limit it. Okay, we're gonna limit your political speech to $100.
We're going to limit your government credit card to $1. All right, so there's one thing I actually want to bring up.
We got to talk a little quieter.
There's one thing I want to bring up. Sorry.
No, you're good.
DOGE. All right, I want to bring up DOGE.
Okay.
Yep.
I want to cover that before you. I'm not going to.
Go ahead.
I want your point. But if you haven't seen the interview that the people from DOGE put out last night with Brett Baer from Fox News, did you see that interview?
I have not.
Okay, you need to. I posted it in the Discord, which is it's called Hardcore History Discussions, and it's in the general or in the political news thread on that Discord. Brett Baer interviewed all the main players from DOGE. It's like eight dudes.
Yep.
All really smart and Elon. Okay, and it was great because they explained straight up, like, oh, here's what we're doing in this department and why, and here's what we see. And instead of just on a website, it was like, here's some smart guy explaining the problem.
Well, and the reason why I bring up DOGE is because Dan Carlin brought up all the information that DOGE is accessing, your credit score, your, whatever, how much you've paid into Social Security, whatever.
They don't have your credit score.
I know. Well,
they have your Social Security number, though.
Dan Carlin thinks they have your credit score.
Well, I don't know, but I don't know why the government would ever have your credit score.
I don't know.
That's not a government issue.
I don't disagree. I'm just saying. So, and then, but why? I mean, I understand why they have access to that. Do we want them to have access to it? And then once they have access to it, what's going to stop another organization or government bureaucracy from tapping into the same information?
Well, no. Say that again?
Wait, so what? Okay. So if DOGE could go in and look at all of your information, Social Security number, blah, 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 what's to stop another political or another government organization?
Nothing's stopping them. They already do it. It's the IRS. I mean, the government is the IRS, the Social Security office. They have all that information anyway. Everybody who works for DOGE has a security clearance. They've had to go through a background check, just like everybody else who works at the federal government. So they're no different than an IRS worker. They're no different than a Social Security worker, where they have access to that database.
Gotcha.
Okay. And
I just wanted to bring that point
up
because I know somebody's going to throw that out there.
Right. But the point of DOGE, and this is why I can't understand. Okay, I guess I understand. Dan Carlin is not a DOGE guy, right? Because he does not trust them.
Yeah.
And he doesn't, mostly because he doesn't trust Trump. But that's fine. Like Matt said, go read the executive orders.
Yeah.
Go read the executive orders and tell me which ones are unconstitutional. Because that's the thing, right? The executive orders that Trump is passing have to do with actual powers that the executive branch should have. And if any of them aren't, I haven't read them all. If any of them aren't, then good. I hope these courts smack them down. Because I am not a team Trump. I am a team America.
Sure.
And if, the movie, Team America.
Yeah. Don't stop it. Stop
that
it.
movie's so good, though.
Anyway.
Okay. But on America and Team America, I want the courts to slap down things that he's trying to do that are unconstitutional as unconstitutional.
Sure.
And I almost don't mind when the Supreme Court does something I disagree with, like the most recent one that went against Trump. I thought the dissent that was written by Clarence Thomas was better, but I also think that it was probably good that they lost so that the people would have a little bit more of a reassurance that the Supreme Court is still a check on the power of the president. And it is, because they don't just give him anything he wants. But if you only listen to one side, well, it's a conservative court, so Trump can do whatever he wants. Except he loses all the time.
Yeah.
They all do. The Supreme Court that's why you can't allow packing the Supreme Court. And that's why that's the line in the sand.
Well,
because the Supreme Court is the last real check on the power of the president, unless Congress wakes up and pulls their head out of their asses.
Well, and that's the other thing, George. You can look at some of the bills that Congress has voted on lately, like deporting illegal immigrants for violent acts or rape or anything like that. Every single Democrat voted no.
Right.
How that doesn't even make any sense. Oh, we got to hold party lines.
Right.
Come on. Let's even Hillary Clinton. I think it was like 20 years ago, came out and had a speech saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. Hey, if they're violent offenders, we got to deport them.
Right.
But all of a sudden the Democrat Party's like, well, that's a Republican bill, so we're not going to.
And that's why this election was so important.
But sure, but it's not going to change. That's why you're talking about extreme partisanship. I don't think that's going anywhere.
It can.
Unless you have like a Tulsi Gabbard.
I'm going to explain how it fixes. And that's if the Democratic Party dies or gets beaten so bad that they have to come to Jesus.
Like, look at what they're touting now. Bernie Sanders and AOC.
Right now they are doubling down on all the woke shit. Because you look at what Gavin Newsom's doing in this podcast, right? He's trying to distance himself from the far left. And what do? They come out and burn him down. Oh, he's a traitor and all this stuff, right? For walking back a little bit of the extreme. Okay.
But how do you know that's not a political
ploy? It's 100%. Because he's lied.
Yeah.
He straight up lied. He told Charlie Kirk that he never used the term Latinx. Okay. And then they found a bunch of videos and tweets of him saying Latinx. So just lying.
Yeah.
But that's Gavin Newsom. He's a politician. Politicians lie. All of them on both sides. They lie. Trump lies. But at least I think his lies are usually trying to put the country in a better position.
Well, depending on your point of view.
Yeah.
And that's anyway. I'm sorry. I strayed off of DOGE. I wanted to stick on DOGE for a minute. Now, Elon actually came out. I think it was on the Joe Rogan podcast. And after the election, he goes, "Will you be surprised out of all the fraud we're finding?"
Right.
And he says, "Well, most of it is being committed by Democrats. Some of it's being committed by Republicans as well. And I am all for those people need to be tried." I'm sorry.
The NGO. See, the thing is a lot of the fraud does not raise to the level of crimes because they're the ones that make the laws.
But it's still fraud.
But Congress is the one that makes the laws.
Yeah, but you're defrauding the American people.
But Congress is the one that makes the laws.
Matt,
so the real fraud is $2 billion to Stacey Abrams' NGO. She formed an NGO in 2023, and in 2024, Joe Biden, his Treasury Department sent her $2 billion for her NGO. Now, is that fraud?
100%.
Can we prove that? That's the problem. So you may not be able to try her, but at least you can make that shit public and you can end that stuff. Because how many politicians' wives and husbands work at an NGO that gets millions and billions of dollars? And it turns out it's a
lot of them.
It's a lot of them.
But we can bring that home to Michigan here. I can tell you about who runs the taxes collected for marijuana sales. You'll never guess.
Whitmer's husband?
Yeah.
That's whoa. The governor's husband.
Yeah, they've collected $1.25 billion, and they can only account for $250 million of it. And guess where that $250 million went, George? Administrative fees.
Of course.
How do I get in on that?
We're gonna
exactly
get a government job.
All right, so
marry a woman in the government, Matt.
Well, if you look at
so if you work for the government, Matt, sing the ladies.
If you look at the U.S. debt clock, according to what's on there now, DOGE has saved over $250 billion in about 2 months.
Yeah, they said their goal is to hit $1 trillion by the first 120 days, because then Elon's special appointment runs out in like 120 or 130 days, and his goal is to hit the trillion by then and not need to re-up it. That's
they
his plan.
Just issued the final notices to all the employees of USAID when they're moving everything over to the State Department.
Right. And think about what he's doing with the Department of Education. Like, how is that not a better idea?
Well, the
Department of Education does not work.
Well, it doesn't. So all the Department of Education only has 4 tasks, and they're not very good tasks.
It's not just that. They do 4 tasks that we want to keep. They do a bunch of other shit that doesn't help. Like they do a lot of stuff with student loans. And since Department of Education has been formed, student loans have shot up tremendously. The cost of tuition has shot up.
Sure.
Directly correlating to when the Department of Education started running student loans in 1980. Go look at the chart. It's not a coincidence. Okay, because when the government gets involved, then those students know, or the colleges know that the students can get the money no matter what the degree is.
Yeah.
So they raise the cost of everything. And then you know what? The teachers don't get paid more. They hire more administrators to find more students. So it just causes bloat. And that's how bureaucracy works. It just gets bloated. And Dan admitted that too. But he said that's the cost. To him, inefficiency and bloat is the cost of not having a dictator.
Well, that's
but
I don't think that's accurate.
It's not accurate. Okay. But the problem is he's wrong to think that can't be fixed and that we need to fix it every once in a while. Or the country does go bankrupt and we end up with something worse than the Great Depression.
Sure.
If we don't fix the bureaucracy once in a while, it's probably something like every 60 or 80 years, we need to just fix this shit or it's going to get worse. And Elon's right. We're going to go bankrupt. And really who we're hurting is our kids.
Yep.
Now we don't sacrifice that for individual liberty. That's important. So I would like to touch on a couple of things that are happened in the recent news that would make some people argue, and that they argue that Trump's not free speech or not pro free speech, and that's the deporting of students who are on visas or green cards. And you will hear people argue that proves that they are not free speech advocates. Okay, that Trump's not, that the Republicans are not really pro free speech. They're just they don't want to hear takes against Israel or pro Hamas speech. And I think that is mixing two issues. Matt, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Do you want to? Am I laying that issue out well before I talk about why I disagree?
No, yeah, I think that's good. Go with it.
Okay, so there's this a grad student from one of the Ivy League schools, Columbia or Penn.
I think it was Columbia.
Columbia, who the Secretary of State Marco Rubio says led a lot of these shut down protests and invasions of school buildings and threatening of Israeli students and things like that, or Jewish students, and released a lot of pro-Hamas propaganda. Okay, and he has a green card, but he's not a citizen. He's not a naturalized citizen. And the Secretary of State, they are deporting him. Okay, and now I understand the argument that, hey, Americans, we believe in the First Amendment, but he's not entitled to the First Amendment. To get into this country, he had to swear that he would not support terrorism.
Yeah.
He had to swear that. I didn't have to swear that. I didn't, right? To be a citizen, I didn't have to swear that. I can support terrorism as long as I'm not violating other laws with my speech. I can support terrorism if I wanted to. I don't. But I mean, I have more free speech rights than this person who swore that he was going to come here and not do that.
Yeah.
If we allow people to come in and then support causes that are against our national interest, then we open ourselves up to the universities being corrupted by foreign actors.
Sure.
Which is what's happening. And so what Trump is trying to do is fix our universities. And I think, thank God for that, because I have 3 kids who might end up going to one of these universities one day, and I don't want them to be broken. And so if they can fix them, I'm all for it. Foreign nationals do not have free speech rights.
That's a good point, and I think even more, he's just trying to uphold the rule of law in our country. Because if you're breaking the law, guess what? You don't get to stay in this country if you didn't belong here in the first. It's just like the thing with the Tesla domestic terrorism things. Guess what? These people were threatening to bring explosives to car lots in our country. That is literally the definition of that is literally the definition of domestic terrorism. People were saying it's a personal issue because he's friends with Musk. It's not the case. Zoom out. Take the names out of it. It's the same thing.
It's for political reasons.
Just stop.
It's for political reasons. If
you know
you're
what's
ruining
our country is not acknowledging that people are breaking the law and letting them get away with it because you don't like the guy in charge. That's what's ruining our country, dude.
Right.
Well, and my favorite thing is when you see memes from like leftists when they say protesting Bud Light is the exact same thing as people lighting Teslas on fire.
Kid Rock shooting Bud Light that he paid for.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody's saying don't blow up your own Tesla you bought.
Yeah, well,
you bought that shit. Go for it.
Go ahead. What I think's funny, even better,
and it's not domestic terrorism if you key a Tesla because the guy cut you off.
Sure.
If you key a Tesla because you think Elon Musk is a fascist trying to overthrow the government, then that's political and you're a domestic terrorist. Now, to contrary that, Biden and the FBI under Biden, and this is another thing that Dan never talks about, sent the FBI to school board meetings to spy on parents because parents who did not want woke books in their library were labeled as domestic terrorists. That happened just a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is worse? I'm going to blow up other people's property. And then this one's like, I'm going to go protest at a school board meeting that they're trying to teach my kids that a girl can be a boy. Which one's closer to domestic terrorism?
Definitely blowing the cars up.
Definitely. So we miss the forest through the trees again because Trump bad.
Yeah.
Trump bad.
Well, and anybody listening to this knows, and anybody that's listened to our podcast knows, we've interviewed with leftists as well, and self-proclaimed communists as well. I mean, and we just have discussions. So we're not, yes, we may lean a little more to the conservative.
Scott and I tend to be more conservative.
Sure. But we talked to Hans. Nice guy. We had a good conversation.
Yep. He's a liberal.
And I am a registered Democrat who voted for Kamala Harris, and I'm sitting here saying all this stuff. So it's a different world, man. It's a different world, okay?
I just wanted to remind people.
Because it is time to leave the partisan stuff behind.
It freaking is, man.
And the only way that happens is if the world wakes up to the lies that the far left is telling.
Well, the problem is, George, a lot of people are keyboard warriors. And they have their, look at what this conservative said, or look what this liberal said.
Sure.
And really what we need to do, and there's some people that are never going to see your point of view and you will never agree with their point of view.
Right.
But it's a lot different when you have a conversation face to face, or if you just have a conversation, even like Zoom
or on the phone.
It's the same thing. Yep. Even over Zoom, they see you, they know, like there's some kind of human connection, even though it's digital. Anyway, sorry, I kind of.
No, you're right. Though. That's the partisanship. Look at this new. This is coming out on. Well, this week is the end of March, and there was this big thing this week in. This big controversy with the Signal chat. Some people in the Trump administration accidentally added a journalist to their Signal chat and then discussed the plans to bomb the Houthis on that Signal chat with the journalist on the chat. Bonehead move.
Sure.
Bonehead move.
But we've all done it.
Sure. Maybe it was classified stuff. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. The Democrats say it's classified. The Republicans say it's not. I don't know. But for the Democrats to tilt at this windmill after the fucking disaster of Afghanistan withdrawal.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's
that Secretary of Defense never stepped down, but they want the Trump guy to step down after a successful military engagement. They want Hegseth to step down after a successful military engagement.
Yeah.
Because they talked about some of the details on a Signal with an American journalist on it.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, but that's just, it's not even close. Not only that, the Secretary of Defense under that same one, like 2 years later, went missing for 2 weeks and nobody even covered it and he never stepped down. He went AWOL for 2 weeks. It turns out he was in the hospital having a surgery and nobody knew.
I remember that. Yeah.
Nobody knew
he had to get called into the
Biden
president's
administration.
Office. Yeah.
He didn't even tell anybody.
Yeah. That's a major deal.
And he didn't get fired.
Yeah.
So listen, stop being hypocrites.
Firing people's bad.
Stop being hypocrites.
They found cocaine in the White House.
Thank you.
I mean, come on.
Thank you. We don't even know who was in charge.
What I don't like is that when people, and it's a lot of like the Democratic side nowadays saying, but they did it too. So when we come out with things about like the Signal thing and then Afghanistan, my first thought when he posted that in our Discord was like to say that. But I think I've had time to reflect on it now. Mm-hmm. And I think you're absolutely right because this is military stuff involved. when there's lives lost, it's a bigger deal.
That's my point.
And Afghanistan was an absolute debacle. It's been a major point of contention against the veterans to whom I listen. And it's also been something that Trump rails against repeatedly and passionately, rightfully so, because it is one of the major stains on this country. If everybody knew how bad that actually was, I'm not sure everybody knows how bad it was.
Oh, it was bad.
It was like the end of Vietnam, but worse.
No, it was worse. People were beheaded, hunted down, slaughtered.
Or people who were working for us as like interpreters and stuff were absolutely there was retribution against them. We left a lot of people hanging, and our own service people died in the incident. So yeah, it was very, very.
And nobody lost their job.
Not a single. Yeah. And you listen to the Biden administration, they're like, yeah, we did a pretty good job with that one. It was the best it could have been.
$70 billion of equipment. How many people have been killed with our equipment that we left behind?
Point. Don't know.
Yep. We
have no way to know.
We just owned their entire army, Yeah, totally. It's very bad. And you're right. So I think it does apply in that situation where you be like,
it does, because I agree with you.
They messed up. Some maybe Michael Waltz's staffer accidentally added a journalist to the group chat, and he saw like the attack plans. Okay, sure. Yeah, that is bad. That's not freaking great. You know what I mean? But like in the context, you want to talk about military stuff? You're talking about a Secretary of Defense who should step down? Yeah, how about that debacle where people actually got killed?
He didn't add a Houthi to the chat.
That's a good
Houthi have entered the chat.
If he entered a Houthi, I agree. That's terrible.
Yeah.
Big deal. Blow that shit up. Fire some people.
Sure.
Yeah, fire some people. But he did not. And I agree with you, Matt. This whole, he did it first. That's not what I want this to come across.
Right.
And because that's not what I'm attacking Dan's arguments for.
I fully acknowledge that.
And I want to make sure to make that clear. My point is that Trump is trying to actually return us to a more normal time with the powers of the president being a little bit more limited, because he's not doing all the shit that fucking Biden was doing.
And he's not taking over the country like the leftists think he's going to do.
He put in Supreme Court justices who did what? Return the power to states.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to talk about Dobbs? What did Dobbs do? It returned the power to make that decision to the states, which is what? Wade. A return to the Constitution.
Sure. Or Roe v. Wade. That's another one.
10th Amendment. That's what it overturned. That's Dobbs.
Sorry. All right.
It's the 10th Amendment. It says all powers not so herein delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states or the people. Okay? He put in justices that allowed for the writing of a ridiculous judgment. A power grab by the federal government. That's what Roe v. Wade was. It was a judicial power grab by the federal government. Okay, under the judicial branch, not the executive branch.
Yep.
And so
because they tried to legislate from the bench.
Trump put in 3 judges, and by that they took power away from the federal government and put it back to the states. That's what he did. Okay. That is. What Biden did the whole time in office was try to gain more power to the federal government. And what Trump is trying to do is return power to the states. Get rid of the Department of Education. He's saying, states, you run your education. Gee, like they're supposed to under the Constitution?
And they,
but Dan is never going to see that stuff because he sees Trump as somebody who is a raging narcissist with zero empathy and throws out all political norms. But he throws out a lot of the more modern norms. But his goal
Good point.
is to, I really think that Trump's goal is to try to go down as the greatest president in American history, not to be Caesar, but to be more like Sulla.
But to be Cincinnatus.
No, I think Sulla. But without the blood.
Yeah.
But he sees himself as doing the job that Sulla saw himself as doing.
You know who Cincinnatus was, right?
I do. The soldier who returns to his farm. But to me, he sees himself more as a Sulla
the consul
saw the breaks in the system and said, I need to fix this system to get it back to what it was. Now, his way of doing it was literally murder lists.
Yeah.
Trump's not doing that. Yeah. Trump's saying our system was so good that if we could just dial this back some. He's not some super radical. He's not. Listen, there are people who were running on cutting 80% of the government. And Trump is not trying to do that. Vivek Ramaswamy wanted to do that. And I would have voted for that because I think that would be great. But that is a hard landing.
Well,
okay, that is something that Trump doesn't want because that is a hard 3 or 4 years probably before we bounce back and really run shit. There would be a lot more repercussions. I think Trump is literally trying to be the next George Washington. And why wouldn't you want a president that's trying to be the next George Washington? That's exactly the kind of person you really want. Now, you may not agree with the way he thinks that is. Sure. But that's what I think he's trying to be. He's not trying to be the next Julius Caesar. He's trying to be the next George Washington. Like, let's set this country up for another 200 years of kicking ass under our system.
I like it.
That's what he's trying. Now, maybe the way he's doing it won't work. Maybe Dan's right and he's just laying the groundwork. But I would argue that if you look reasonably, rationally over the last 10 years, it has been the Democrats who have done way more to endanger our system than Trump.
Oh, I'd say more than 10. But yeah.
But I'm just saying even 10. Because if you want to go back to Bush, you could say he did a lot. The Patriot Act.
Sure.
The war in Iraq, the whole lies about weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, sure. And then Obama got in office and then didn't undo any of that. Right?
Because
None.
it's business as usual.
Because
he pushed his own agenda.
Because
that's what he ran on.
When you give power to the federal government, they tend to not take it back.
Yep.
But at least Trump is trying to avoid starting new wars. And then people are going to say, well, he bombed the Houthis. Well, that is a terrorist organization
who were shooting missiles
at American boats. Yeah. He did not put troops on the ground. He did not do something that is going to be us in a sustained conflict. He's just like, these are a gnat, I'm going to swat. Yeah. That's not war. He's trying to end the war in Iraq. He's trying to put pressure for the Israelis to end the war in Gaza.
Trying to end the war in Ukraine.
Literally campaigned on, let's end all these wars. Both times.
Yeah.
Okay? That's what he's trying to do. So I agree with Dan that the power of the president to make war is a problem because they shouldn't actually have that under the Constitution. But at least Trump's not the one that's out there pushing new wars.
Yeah. I think it's 90 days, right? President can declare war for 90 days unless ratified by the Constitution.
No, they don't declare war, but they can just call it a police action and then it go on for years.
Well, that's...
Yeah. Thanks, MacArthur.
Right, because that's a power grab, and that's what Dan was talking about, and that has happened.
Well, that's happened.
True.
That happened since Vietnam.
So the War Powers Act, all Congress needs to do is resend the War Powers Act. All right, like there's ways to fix this, but if we're gonna really get back to limiting the power of the president, Congress has to get off their ass and do shit.
But they won't, because they won't work together.
That's a big part of it. They won't work together, and another part of it is they are too busy just making money.
Sure. And robbing us blind. Oh, the other thing, by the way, since we brought up DOGE and insider trading, I don't care who's doing it. That shit's got to stop. Yeah. I don't care if it's your husband running your, they know what bills are going to get passed. They know exactly who it's going to benefit.
Yeah.
This is trash.
Sure.
There's no way.
But if that's the shit that's happening legally, what's the shit happening illegally?
Well,
that was one of the most interesting things from the Rogan Elon Musk podcast. Matt, do you remember this part where he said, he was asking him, Rogan was pushing him on, well, what else? What is Congress really doing?
And he couldn't say it.
And Elon said, I don't think I can tell you.
Wow.
Because I think I will get killed. If I push too hard on this, he goes, I'm walking a fine line. I have to push against the fraud, but if I push too hard, I'll get
I remember
killed.
that. Yeah. Don't mess with their money, man.
That's the richest man in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
The richest man in the world is actively afraid of like 500 people who make way less money than him combined.
Yeah,
they are all worth less money than him combined.
Right.
But they have power, and they know how to disappear people, and so he still has to be afraid, and that's not how our system's supposed to work.
Well, and that's the other thing about Elon is shit. Now I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Yeah.
God, what the hell was I going to say? Whatever.
Well,
anyway,
I think it's probably getting close to wrapping this up. Do you guys have anything more you want to say? Like, that was Well, go ahead, Matt. You give your closing thoughts, and then Scott will go, and then I'll go.
I think that I'm just really grateful for conversations like these because it's some of the few people I get to talk to about this stuff that makes me feel natural and normal because, my thoughts are very much in alignment with yours on things, and I'm coming from the other side. So it's a weird, I talk to some of my best friends. I talk to a lot of other people, and it's just a total clash. And I think that one thing I wanted to say earlier was what can we do to fix this? But this is what we can do. We can keep talking about it in an ameliorating manner and slowly de-escalate this stuff, man. Just de-escalate. We all have a lot more in common as Americans than all the media and all that kind of stuff would have you believe. And as long as we talk to each other, we can do anything together. So I'm happy for this opportunity. Thank you.
Oh, we're really happy to have you, Matt. Thank you. Scott?
I think I've touched on everything, but I'm going to do my best Ron Swanson.
Nice.
Slash it. Now, look, I understand people are losing their jobs, and that's not easy for anybody. But I mean, listen, the bureaucracy, the problem with government bureaucracy is it only grows; it never gets smaller. And then when DOGE is finding out, or at least you're hearing reports where people were booking trips and paying for lunches and all this other stuff on the government on taxpayer money. And it doesn't matter how minuscule it is. Like some people were like, well, what do I care about $20 million when it comes to the federal budget of, whatever trillions of dollars. And I go, that's not the point. It
all adds up.
The point is, yeah, it's only $20 million. Well, shit, don't waste that money. Give it to me. Like, I'll be more than happy to have $20 million. I mean, it's $20 million we don't have to pay in taxes. Now, one thing that Elon did bring up, and somebody mentioned this on Twitter, it's like, hey, if you save X amount of dollars, give a dividend to people. I do not want that to happen.
It was only if they hit some crazy goal.
It doesn't matter.
But they're not going to do that.
It doesn't matter if they hit it or not. Do not do that because maybe if you save $1 trillion and you send $5,000 to all you're going to do is increase inflation. Anybody who thinks that's a good idea just does not understand.
All that happened was somebody posted about it on Twitter,
and he said, "Yeah, I'll talk to
Elon
Donald."
Said, "That's interesting. I'll talk to Donald."
Sure. I just hope they don't do that. That's just
they're not.
It's a dumb
Nobody's
idea.
Talked about it since then.
Good, because it's a stupid.
That was
idea.
a news story for like a week and then it died off.
And anyway, I'm just happy that. And I hope Dan listens to this. He probably won't.
I'm sure he won't.
He's honestly, if you don't see, or if he doesn't see that this administration is effectively limiting or decreasing the size of the executive branch and forcing the legislative branch to actually do their job, then I would ask him to just revisit that and at least try to consider the difference.
At
here.
least that's the goal. So my final thoughts. When Dan started posting about this stuff on Twitter, we've had him on the show before. I emailed him and said, Dan, I disagree about this issue, and I think it would be great if we could talk about it. So if you'd like to come on, I'd love to have you on and discuss this. I didn't hear back, and I'm sure he gets a million emails like that.
Sure.
I don't hold that against him. I don't even know if he saw it. And I don't blame him if he saw it and said,
"Yeah, just
who the
delete."
fuck are these guys?"
Well,
that doesn't bother me at all.
But
I would still, if he hears this, I would love to talk to him about this because I think that there is a middle ground, and I think that he should. I hope he hears that there are people who are conservative or more conservative bent that also worry about the things he worries about freedom and individual liberty, and can see from our perspective where what we're hoping is Trump is a return to more of those normal values. With that, now I don't know that that's not going to bear itself out in Twitter or on X, but if he can roll back some of these far extreme power grabs of the federal government, then that's a win for liberty.
Yeah.
And I would hope that people could see past their hatred of Trump personally to see that is a good thing. And then I would say as to DOGE, in that interview last night on Fox, which I saw on X, again, it's in the discussion chat, hardcore history discussions. In that interview, Elon said right now, 0.09% of the federal government has lost their job since DOGE started. 0.09.
Wow.
So it's not like they've just leveled it.
Yeah.
And those people have received really good buyouts that give them a lot of time to find a job.
Sure.
Yeah, that's what the yeah.
It's not like they're out there just, and they talked about that, like, hey, we have a lot of empathy for these people. Just because it's not, they're not in the federal government doesn't mean they're not good people. That but we think that they would be better, and it would be better for the country if they were in the private sector. Great.
Sure.
There's nothing wrong with that. I work for an NGO, and I agree that it's bloated and the system needs to get fixed. I don't think it's sustainable. I think Trump put his finger on that. Him and Elon ran on that with Elon as his going to let him fix the federal government. And they're using software to find, that's the other thing they talk about a lot, is how they're using software to find all these inefficiencies and fraud. That's not fascism. And he's talking about an oligarchy.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So what Trump's doing is he's got DOGE, and they're publishing everything on their website, and they're making it clear. But when you have an oligarchy, that's not how it works.
Well,
what was the last 4 years, if not an oligarchy? Because we don't even know who was making the decisions.
This is a dismantling of the oligarchy,
There's
or at least an attempt.
Well, and that's one thing Dan said. Okay, Dan said that there are people who make the argument that we've been an oligarchy for years.
Sure.
Okay, and I think that there's at least a little bit of a good argument for that. But what I would tell you is the last 4 years were some of the worst egregious examples of us being an oligarchy, because whoever was running Biden wasn't ever elected, and we don't even know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think it was president by committee. It was ran by committee.
Maybe.
Sure.
But we don't know. And we'll never know.
Yeah.
So that's the problem, right? That's an oligarchy. That's a bunch of rich people making decisions without the elected, the populace having any say. Okay. What Trump did is he ran on this campaign, and the people voted for it. And then they are being super transparent. And he put a deadline in.
Yeah.
DOGE ends July 4th, 2026. Is done. They put a deadline on a government agency that's never happened before. Right? That's why they don't even know the number of government agencies in the federal government.
Yeah, we were talking about that.
They don't know.
That makes no sense.
Think about that. They can't even tell you the exact amount.
And everyone, and this is when we were talking about, scaling back the government, and every one of those agencies has a bureaucracy,
and they make rules that are law to the people they affect.
Yeah.
That is not democracy or a republic. That is not the elected people making the rules. Congress is supposed to do that shit. So if we get from some of these federal agencies, then Congress can make those laws.
Well,
because that's how it's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
You want clean water? Congress passed an act. You want the EPA to enforce something? It should be a law that Congress passed, not a rule that unelected officials
that the EPA
decide
doesn't pass.
That you don't get to appeal to an actual court. You realize that, right? If an EPA does a rule that puts you in violation, you only get to fight it in the administrative court. You don't actually get to take it to a real court.
Mm.
Okay, like it's a whole system set up to circumvent the actual way the federal government is supposed to work.
Yeah,
and that's why the Supreme Court, with 3 judges Trump put on, when they overturned a decision a couple years ago that said they would put, the decision, I can't remember the name of the case, but the decision was, before that, the Supreme Court said there would be strict scrutiny on any rules passed by the administrative state, which means that the government, that the courts would say they were going to put an extreme bias in favor of the rule of the administrative state. They weren't gonna look at it very hard. Okay.
Yeah.
Supreme Court said that's ridiculous. They opened the door to overturning the administrative state. with this ruling. I can't remember the name of the case. It was a couple years ago. Huge deal. Okay. What they did is they said, we are going to look at all these rules like they are just anything else. We are not going to give them any deference. Okay. And we're going to basically limit the power of the administrative state. That's the Supreme Court reapplying itself as a check on the power of the executive.
Yeah.
Which is nothing but a good thing.
Well, since you brought that up, and I'm sure, and most of our listeners would probably agree, I wish there was a DOGE for every state in the country. I mean, at least for the next year or two.
A few of them don't really need it. Like
yeah.
Wyoming and stuff. They run in the black, and they they probably don't need it near as much.
Well,
like
Michigan
needs one.
It's funny. We spend the most on roads, and we have the 40th worst roads in the country.
Okay.
Same thing with students. We spend the most per capita on students, and we have some of the worst test scores.
So one more thing that I think we could talk about here that I think is, okay, I know I was going to wrap it up, but this is something I wanted to tell you guys about that I don't know if you know about.
Okay.
So right now, the federal government is currently still prosecuting the terrorists from 9/11. In that Common Sense episode, Dan Carlin talked about the attorney who was talking about torture to the Senate, right? Yep. Well, I want to give a little more background because one of my good friends from law school is actually one of the attorneys who's working to prosecute the 9/11 terrorists. What happened before Abu Ghraib, before all those pictures came out and all the torturing and all that stuff, after 9/11, but before they started doing the extreme renditions, the administration in the CIA, they went to the Department of Justice, said, okay, what counts as torture and what doesn't? Give us a guideline. And the DOJ said, well, tell us what things you want to do for your enhanced interrogations. So they gave them a list. And the Department of Justice said, you can do this, you can't do that, you can do this, you can't do that. Okay? That happened. Okay. So then they did this, and none of that. After those pictures came out, Obama in the DOJ said, no, retroactively that's torture, even though they had an actual paper in writing from the DOJ saying this is not torture.
Yeah.
And then they tried people or kicked them out of their jobs for doing things that they said they could do, like waterboarding. They said it wasn't torture. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but they were told that it wasn't. Yeah. And then they changed the rules on them. And because of that, there has been, since Obama, there has been this massive unwillingness to really push the prosecution of these terrorists. And so at every turn, the Biden administration and the Obama administration made it harder for the attorneys for the Department of Justice who were prosecuting these terrorists, which culminated with Biden last year with his administration agreeing to a plea deal with one of them that was so bad. This is one of the terrorists who directly planned 9/11, was so bad that the public outcry was so bad that they are trying to cancel that plea deal. But the way this system works is we are paying millions of dollars for the defense of these terrorists from 9/11. Millions a year. Because there's only a few attorneys that are allowed to do this, that are registered to do court appointed for capital cases.
Sure.
And then they put their bills and they invoice their bills, right? They don't have to actually say how many hours, and they don't actually have to say how many hours they worked on this thing. They just say, this cost me this much time, or this much money for this motion. And they file every frivolous motion possible to pad their bills.
Yeah.
Every one possible. Okay. They delay and delay because they keep making millions of dollars. And we are paying for this.
Yep.
For the people to have a legal defense, we are paying millions of dollars for the people who plan 9/11 to have a legal defense. Okay. No other country in the world does that. And if the public knew how insane this stuff was, like he tells me stuff that is public. There is so much that he's not allowed to tell me that he's like, I can't wait for this to be done and this to come out because it's nuts. And it is so bad.
And it's 23 years.
And then, so then DOGE comes out and they start filing more frivolous motions because, hey, DOGE can't affect us even though we're government workers. They can't make us send emails about what we did this week because that's a violation of our client attorney privilege and all this shit. And so they just file more motions, just time to delay and pad their bills. And all of us are paying for that.
That's insane.
Okay. And it's all bullshit. Okay. It's bullshit. They have confessions. They have all this stuff for these people. And we are still dealing with that. 9/11 was 20 some years ago.
Yep. 23.
That's the government.
24.
That's the federal government. Okay. Now I believe in a justice system where people get their fair share, their fair trial. But these are also not American citizens, and we also have to remember that. Like this, we don't just execute, war criminals. We give them their fair trial, but how many millions of dollars do we have to spend?
It's once again, if you ask most people, that's a drop in the bucket.
Most people don't think that. Most people are going to be mad. People who are politically identified to one side are going to say if the other side's spending it, that's just a drop, or if their side's spending it, it's a drop in the bucket. Yeah. Most people would be flipping out if they knew that story. If they found out that they were paying to defend the people who caused 9/11, they would be mad. And if they find out they were paying tens of millions of dollars, they would be livid.
Well,
and they should be.
It's some people will hear it.
Well,
and it's all public. So. There's so much that's public record that we just don't even.
That's the problem. Around. It's because it's so much. But anyway, that's the system that we're trying to fix because you don't throw it out.
Wow.
You don't throw it out. You fix it.
Yep.
And I hope that's what Trump's trying to do. I think Dan's wrong in his assessment of Trump, but I understand why he thinks the way he does. I hope someday to get to talk to him about it, but it's probably not possible.
It'd be nice. I don't think he'd risk it.
I don't know about risk it. It's like, why would he waste his time on us? And that's fair. I don't blame him.
He's already done it once.
Yeah, but at least that was talking about history, right? That was talking about history.
Yeah.
All right, guys. We're going to get back. I swear the next episode's going to be, the next episode we're doing is a return to
trivia.
No. Yeah, we need to do that. But also the next episode we're going to do is about the dryer. We're going back to 2 classic Dan Carlin hardcore history episodes.
Oh, yeah.
Was it Hansen and Dreyer?
Yep.
The 2, 23 and 24 of the original episodes, I believe.
Cool.
Dyer Effect.
The Dyer Effect. So Matt, listen to those. We'll talk next week, hopefully, and get that out in the next couple weeks. So
sweet.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Matt, thanks again.
Thanks for listening.
All right, everybody. Have a good night.
Peace.